New York, 1997. A boardroom on the 42nd floor, glass walls, a dozen executives around a table, and every woman in that room dressed to disappear into the furniture. Dark suits, no color, nothing that could be mistaken for personality. One woman walks in wearing a wrap dress in a print loud enough to be visible from the elevator bank. She isn't there to blend in. She's there to close the deal, and by the end of the meeting, she has. Diane von Furstenberg wasn't in that room. But she's told the story dozens of times since, because a friend who was there called her that same afternoon, and the way she describes it, that single phone call crystallized something she'd been trying to articulate her entire career. That power and femininity were never supposed to be opposites. Someone had just proven it in real time, in a room built to punish exactly that idea. That's where this story starts. Not with a dress, with a phone call that confirmed a theory. I've spent 2 decades writing about the people who reshaped how we think about fashion's relationship to authority, and few designers have built their entire philosophy as explicitly around one idea as Diane von Furstenberg has around power. She didn't just want to make women look good. She wanted to solve a specific practical problem. How does a woman walk into a room built by and for men and command it without imitating the men in it, without armor, without apology? That question has driven her work since the early 70s, when the wrap dress first appeared and quietly became one of the most significant garments of the 20th century, not because of how it looked, but because of what it let a woman do. Put it on in 30 seconds, walk into a meeting, a date, a courtroom, a nightclub, and be fully, unmistakably in charge of the room, all in the same dress. So when I built this list, I wasn't interested in who wore her clothes best on a red carpet. I wanted to know something harder. Who taught her what power dressing actually meant, decade after decade, long before there was a phrase for it? Not the richest women she's dressed, not necessarily the most photographed. The ones who redefined in front of her, in real time, what authority could look like on a woman's body. 5 women, 5 decades. Let's start with the one who, according to Diane herself, changed the entire conversation before the wrap dress even existed. Number 1. Gloria Steinem. Von Furstenberg has spoken about the early 70s as a genuinely disorienting time to be a young woman trying to build a business. The language for what she wanted to do barely existed yet. Gloria Steinem was, by that point, already one of the most visible faces of the movement that was actively rewriting what women were allowed to want out loud, and von Furstenberg has credited watching Steinem operate in public, calm, precise, entirely unwilling to perform anger or softness for anyone's comfort, with giving her a kind of permission she didn't know she was waiting for. What struck von Furstenberg specifically wasn't the politics, or at least not only the politics, it was Steinem's presentation. She never dressed like she was trying to prove a point through austerity, the way so many public figures of that era believed seriousness required plainness. Steinem wore her own aesthetic, unapologetically feminine in places, and never let anyone mistake that for a lack of seriousness. Von Furstenberg has described that specifically as the seed of the wrap dress's entire philosophy, that a woman shouldn't have to choose between looking like herself and being taken seriously, and that the assumption she had to choose was itself the actual problem worth designing against. Decades later, von Furstenberg has said that every time she second-guessed whether a print was too much for a boardroom, she thought about Steinem and put the print in anyway. Number 2. Diahann Carroll. In 1968, Diahann Carroll became the first black woman to star in her own television series, playing a professional character rather than domestic help. A nurse, raising a son alone, dressed with the same polish and authority any executive would expect for herself. Von Furstenberg has talked about watching that show as a young woman newly arrived in America and recognizing something in Carroll's performance that went beyond acting. It was a woman refusing, on camera, in front of millions of households, to shrink the character into anything smaller or more apologetic than the role deserved. What von Furstenberg has pointed to specifically is Carroll's wardrobe on and off screen, sharp, considered, unmistakably glamorous, in a way that never undercut her authority, precisely because Carroll refused to treat those two things as being in tension. Von Furstenberg has described Carroll as proof of something she'd later build her entire brand around, that dignity and glamour aren't opposing forces fighting for the same square footage on a woman's body. They can occupy the exact same outfit at the exact same time, and when they do, the effect is more powerful than either quality alone could produce. Carroll was doing that in prime-time American television years before von Furstenberg had a name for what she was watching. Number 3. Barbara Walters. Von Furstenberg and Barbara Walters moved in overlapping New York circles for decades, and von Furstenberg has spoken specifically about watching Walters conduct interviews with heads of state, dictators, movie stars, and disgraced public figures, always in the same register, composed, precise, never raising her voice to command a room that, by every conventional measure of the era, wasn't built to hand a woman that kind of authority without a fight. What von Furstenberg has singled out about Walters isn't a single outfit or a single interview. It's the consistency. Decade after decade, Walters showed up dressed with the same exacting polish, whether she was interviewing a president or a pop star, never dialing the presentation up or down based on how seriously she suspected the room might take her. Von Furstenberg has described that as a specific lesson about power dressing that took her years to fully absorb herself. That authority isn't something you perform harder in rooms that doubt you. It's something you simply continue being at the same steady register until the room adjusts instead. Walters never once looked like she was trying to convince anyone of anything. She looked like someone who'd already decided the outcome before she sat down. Number 4. Anna Wintour. Here's a point worth pausing on, because there's a popular myth about the relationship between von Furstenberg and Anna Wintour that flattens two of the most consequential women in modern fashion into a simple mentor and protege story. And it misses what actually made the dynamic significant. People assume Wintour's influence on von Furstenberg was primarily professional. Endorsements, magazine placement, the machinery of fashion press. Von Furstenberg has been specific that what actually shaped her thinking was something narrower and more personal. Watching how completely Wintour refused to explain or soften her own presentation for anyone's comfort. In an industry that has spent decades demanding exactly that kind of softening from its most powerful women. The sunglasses indoors, the bob that hasn't meaningfully changed in 40 years, the refusal to perform warmth she isn't required to perform in a professional context. Von Furstenberg has talked about Wintour as someone who proved that consistency itself can function as armor, that a woman doesn't need to adjust her presentation based on who's in the room or how threatened they might feel by her, because that adjustment is itself a form of concession she's under no obligation to make. Von Furstenberg has credited watching that discipline, sustained across 4 decades at the top of one of the most publicly scrutinized industries in the world, with hardening her own resolve never to apologize for taking up exactly as much space as the work required. Number 5. Oprah Winfrey. Von Furstenberg has spoken about her friendship with Oprah Winfrey as one of the relationships that most directly shaped how she thinks about power in her later career. Specifically because of how visibly Winfrey built an empire on a quality most institutions actively train out of powerful women. Genuine, unguarded warmth, deployed without ever once reading as weakness. What von Furstenberg has pointed to is the way Winfrey dresses across radically different contexts. A state dinner, a farm in Maui, a television studio, without ever losing a consistent thread of authority, regardless of how formal or casual the setting demands. Von Furstenberg has described that as the final piece of the philosophy she'd spent her whole career building toward. That power dressing was never really about formality at all. It was about a woman remaining completely, recognizably herself, no matter what room she walked into, refusing to perform a different version of authority depending on who was watching. Winfrey, in von Furstenberg's account, achieved something rarer than command. She achieved trust, at scale, without ever diminishing her own presence to get it. That combination, warmth without softness, authority without coldness, became something von Furstenberg has said she chased in her own designs for the rest of her career, long after the wrap dress had already made her name. So there they are. Gloria Steinem, who proved a woman didn't have to choose between looking like herself and being taken seriously. Diane Carroll, who showed an entire country that dignity and glamour could occupy the same outfit at once. Barbara Walters, who commanded rooms by simply refusing to perform harder for the ones that doubted her. Anna Wintour, who turned consistency itself into a form of armor. And Oprah Winfrey, who proved that warmth and authority were never actually in competition to begin with. What ties all 5 of them together isn't fame, and it isn't wealth. Von Furstenberg has dressed hundreds of famous wealthy women who never left a mark on her thinking the way these 5 did. What ties them together is that each one in her own decade, in her own field, quietly dismantled the same false choice, the assumption that a woman has to pick between being liked and being respected, between softness and authority, between looking like herself and being believed. Every one of them proved, in public, under scrutiny, that the choice was never real to begin with. Diane von Furstenberg built an entire design philosophy and an entire company on that exact belief, that clothing could be the proof, not just the decoration, of a woman's right to take up space exactly as she is. She didn't invent power dressing by watching these 5 women. She spent 5 decades learning to recognize it in them, one relationship at a time, and then spent the rest of her career trying to sew that same permission into every single piece she ever designed. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments which of these 5 women's stories surprised you the most, or who else belongs on a list like this. I read every one of them. And next time, we're heading somewhere entirely different. Into the story of a designer who built an empire on the exact opposite instinct, not commanding a room, but disappearing into it so completely that the woman wearing the clothes became impossible to ignore.